guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Aperture, aka Mr. Pro Shot, and welcome back to the Pro View. I'm back with another YouTube video. Guys, sorry for being away so long. It's just been busy, hectic, sorting out some things. But I'm back again with another video. So in today's video, what we're going to be covering is some photography terms that you need to know. Basically, I'm going to be giving you a glossary of terms that you need to know as a photographer. So I think I'm going to make it into like a mini series. I'm going to break it into parts. Like for instance, this first video is going to have 10 terms, 10 glossary terms that I'm going to teach you guys today. And then I'll have another video of probably another 10 or how many other I decide to fit into that video. Okay, so the first word we're going to be looking at is aperture. I know you guys, if you guys have watched my previous video where I was talking about photography basics, you should know a few basics about what is aperture. But for those who have not watched that previous video that I was talking about photography basics, for you guys, aperture is the opening through which light passes through the lens and enters the camera. The size of the aperture is what controls the amount of light that comes into your lens. I'm going to show you an example on the screen what it means when we say your aperture is all the way open. Like for instance, the first on this graph is going to show you that wide open would say probably for a lens like a normal 50mm lens. Okay, normal 50mm lens, actually full wide open is f1.8, but for this example here they're starting at f2.8, so f2.8 would be your full wide open. So if you're open at f2.8, that's full wide open, you're going to have a very wide aperture ring. So your aperture ring is all the way open, and then as you go to f4, your aperture ring starts to close a bit, and then as you go to let's go all the way to f16. When you go to f16, your aperture starts to become smaller, so the opening of your aperture starts to become smaller, and as you go all the way to f22, your aperture becomes smaller and smaller. So when you're at aperture 22, your opening can probably be as small as this, as you can see on the graphic. So the lower the aperture, the higher the aperture you have, the wider your lens is open, the wider it is open, the blades, aperture blades are open, the more light the lens lets in. And then the lower your aperture, the less the lens lets in light, and the smaller the hole in your aperture is. So that also just let me just add this. So aperture also how it deals with your shallow depth of field, the amount of bokeh you get in your shots. So yeah, you'll be hearing that term bokeh. It's going to be down in our list explaining what exactly bokeh is and what is depth of field. Okay, so the next term on our glossary list is blue hour. Blue hour is the short period of time before sunrise and after sunset when the sun is just below the horizon. So blue hour is just before the sun is about to rise and just before the sun, as the sun is about to set. That is what we call blue hour. So you know you have our golden hour, which is going to be in our glossary of terms, probably in one of our next videos is going to be there. So most people know about golden hour, but there's also what we call blue hour, just before the sun rises and just before the sun sets. So it gives you a much like a bluish sky looking. You will look at the picture example that I have here to show you what blue hour is. So meaning there's quite a lot of blue in the sky compared to when you have golden hour, where the colors are more golden, the light is more golden. In blue hour, the light is more blue. Okay, so the next term on our glossary list is bokeh. So bokeh, remember where I was saying we were going to talk about the term bokeh, blurred out and all of that. So we don't call the blur that you see on the picture, on the side of the picture where things are out of focus, we don't call it blur, we call it bokeh. As a professional photographer, you call it bokeh. So bokeh is the optical phenomenon that makes the bright out of focus elements aesthetically pleasing to the eye. These big words that I'm using today. It's just something else. Using fast lenses at its widest aperture turns a busy background into a blurred background where light appears as soft shapes. So for instance, like here I have a picture of this lady called Nokwanda, who's one of my clients. You will see that the background behind her is blurred out. She is perfectly in focus and the background is blurred out. It's blurred out. So that what we call behind her is bokeh. That is bokeh. If the background of her is blurred out, that's what we call the bokeh. bokeh effect around her. It makes the picture look nicer. It takes away the busy background behind the picture. For instance, like with this picture, the background of her background is the city behind her, the busy city behind her with city buildings and some trees and grass. But now, because of the bokeh, it helps us make sure that people's attention is more focused on the subject of the picture than the background. But blur, besides the bokeh, for you to get good bokeh, you need to be using a fast lens, as I was saying earlier. You need to be using a lens like f1.8 to f2.8, and probably a nice lens like, for instance, 85mm f1.8 lens, which is going to give you nice bokeh because of the longer lens and the aperture, the high aperture that you're using. You're going to get that nice bokeh that's going to separate the person from the background. So the next term we're going to be having a look at is burst rate. Burst rate is the number of continuous shots a camera can take in continuous shooting mode. When using this mode, images are stored in a high-speed buffer before they are stored in the memory card. So like burst mode, this is more what you would use like when you're shooting fast action things. For instance, like if you're shooting sports, like when, for instance, at the Olympics, if they need to shoot somebody like Usain Bolt running. So as they're running the 100-meter dash, you would have your as a photographer, you would be shooting in burst mode. So you'd be shooting in the highest speed your camera can shoot at, and then you just hold down the shutter, and you'll probably find that your camera can take up to maybe, let's say, 10 pictures in a second or so. I must just check that, but 10 pictures or so. Like my camera, I think, can take about 20 frames per second, if I'm not mistaken, in burst mode, just holding down the shutter and you just take pictures. The nice thing about, again, using burst mode is, like, for instance, when you want to get action shots, like people are jumping up, like you have your model jumping up and you want to catch them like mid-air, you would use burst mode for that. Or action shots of cars, people cycling and other things like that. That's what we use burst mode for. So meaning multiple pictures taken at the same time of one subject. So the next term that we're going to be looking at is candid. So candid is a type of photo that you take. So candid photos are taken when your subject is not aware that you're actually taking a picture of them. It is like, we are basically, with that term that they use in photography, there's a quote that I read somewhere, like, as a photographer, you basically still the moment. You don't ask to take a picture, you still the moment. Like when somebody's in deep in thought or they're busy doing something and you decide to just take the picture, that is what we call a candid. Candid, the person doesn't know you're taking the picture, they're not aware of you taking the picture, they are just busy with their own thing, they're not posing for a picture. You just take a picture, you still the moment forever by capturing that picture. So the next word we're going to have a look at is the word chimping. Chimping means to constantly check the camera display after taking a single shot. So for instance, every time you take a single shot, especially like when you're still shooting with a DSLR camera, which doesn't have a optical viewfinder inside here. What is this word? Now I'm the one not remembering words. But every time, so meaning when you're shooting with a DSLR, when you still have mirror inside, every time you take a picture, you put the camera to your eye, you take a picture, and then you do this. This is what they call chimping. So I take a picture, and then I look at the picture. This is what we call chimping. So every time you do that, after taking a picture, bringing the camera away from your eye and looking at the screen, that is what is called chimping. So if you're not shooting with a mirrorless camera, you're going to do a whole lot of that, a lot of chimping to make sure that your picture looks all right. Your picture is perfectly exposed and it's coming out the way you want it to look like. But with mirrorless cameras, you do probably a whole less of that chimping, because you can already see the picture that you want to get in the camera, in the viewfinder. You already see that if I adjust like this, then my picture is going to come out exactly the way you see it in the viewfinder. So here in the mirrorless camera, there's a lot of chimping, but I still do some chimping when I'm shooting with my mirrorless camera, just to see how does it look like in the bigger screen, to see if my picture is perfectly in focus and I have the right composition, the composition that I wanted to get. So the next term we're going to be having a look at is composition. It is the manner in which elements are positioned within a photo. It is considered one of the most important components of an image, as it allows the photographer to guide a viewer's eye across the image towards the main subject. Okay, so the next term that we're going to be having a look at is contrast. Contrast defines the range of tonal differences between the shadows and lights of an image. As the contrast becomes higher, it emphasizes the variations resulting in stronger textures and colors. Pictures with lower contrast may be perceived as to be dull, as smaller differences between the lights shadows results in muted appearance, results in a muted appearance. Yeah, so we use contrast to make like, for instance, if we are working with colors and things, like the more contrast you put into your shot, the more you're gonna see your highlights and your highlights and your dark spots. So if, let's say, your bright spots and your dark spots. So the more contrast you put, the more you're gonna see if somewhere is darker or somewhere is lighter. If you have your contrast, if you have a low contrast, you won't see the difference between your places that are very bright and your places that are very dark. But when you push a lot of contrast into your picture, you'll be able to see the differences between your dark and light spots, and that also helps you to see your colors. It makes your colors stand out more. It makes your colors a bit more bold. They pop. So the more contrast you put, the bolder your colors look like, because you're able to see your colors more. You're able to see the differentiation between the different colors. Like, for instance, in this picture, I have blue in the background, and then I have her skin tone is like brownish, goldish, and I'm able to see the difference in the colors. I'm able to look at her eyes. I can see the black in her eyes, and all the different things that you see in the shot. Okay, so the next term we're going to be looking at is crop factor. So crop factor is basically the size of not the lens you have, sorry, the sensor that you have in your camera. There's like three crop factors that we're going to look at here on this example that I have here on the screen for you guys. We have a full frame sensor, we have an APC sensor, micro four thirds sensor, and a point and shoot sensor. So the sensors get smaller, and smaller. So for instance, a full frame sensor is like the sensor that I have on this camera, this DSLR camera. On my mirrorless camera, the EOS R has a full size sensor. And then this camera here, the 700D, has an APC sensor. And then I think, is it your Panasonic G5, if I'm not mistaken, has a micro four thirds sensor. And then your point and shoot cameras, which are those cameras, little cameras that people take on holiday and just use to take photos on holiday. Those are your different size sensors. So why is crop factor important? The reason why crop factor is important is because depending on the size sensor you have, that will determine how wide or how narrow your lens is. For instance, if you put a 24mm lens on a full frame camera, you might get a wider field of view than if you put it on an APC sensor. Because, like, for instance, if I put my 50mm lens on my EOS R, it's a full frame camera, I get a wider field of view. But if I put it on the 700D, I get a much narrow field of view because of the smaller sensor. So the last term that we're going to be having a look at is DOF. So DOF stands for depth of field, which is the distance between the closest and furthest objects within a focus zone of an image. It is determined by the focal distance and aperture and the distance to the subject. The higher these numbers are, the more shallow the depth of field will be. So basically what is meant by that is, the higher the aperture you have and the longer the lens you have. So meaning the longer the lens you have, like for instance, if you have a 200mm lens that's shooting at f1.8, the shallow the depth of field will be, basically. So meaning if there's a specific distance away from the camera, like for instance, the depth of field for me being how close to this camera. So if for instance I was shooting with a 85mm lens at f1.8, and I were to put the camera a further distance away from me, it would make the things that impact your DOF or your shallow depth of field are your aperture, and your length of your lens. So aperture, for instance, aperture, as I say, the higher the aperture you have, the more shallow depth of field you're going to have. So if you're shooting at f1.8 or f1.2, which I doubt I will be shooting anytime soon, because an f1.2 lens is quite expensive at the moment to get. And the longer the lens you have, if you have a 100 millimeter lens, you're going to get a very good shallow depth of field, because it's going to blur the background. It's going to create a whole lot of separation between you and the background. So your background is going to have nice blurred out bokeh. No, why am I saying blurred out? It's going to have nice bokeh. I was teaching you the term bokeh, and now I'm using the word blurred. It's going to have nice bokeh around you, and you will be separated from the background. So just to reiterate, the things that impact your shallow depth of field is your aperture, your distance away from the subject, and the length of the lens you have. Those are the three things that impact your depth of field. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video where I was explaining the 10 terms that I explained today, guys. I hope that was very informative to you guys. If you guys did like this video, please do leave a like and a comment, and please do subscribe for more content like this, where I'll be explaining more terms like this, and I'll be probably later on be getting more in depth into each term that I did explain today, like your composition, your bokeh, aperture, and things, like getting more in depth into those specific terms and how do they work by themselves. How do you go about using those things in your photography? Yeah, so guys, please do like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. It's been Fencer Petler, aka Mr. Pro Shot, and this has been the Pro View. Until next time, bye.